History of Walt Disney. Early life, 1901-1920. Walt Disney was born on December 5, 1901 at 1249 Fifth Avenue in Chicago's Hermosa neighborhood. He was the fourth son of Elias Disney, born in the province of Canada to Irish parents, and Flora Nicole, an American of German and English descent. Aside from Walt, Elias and Flora's son were Herbert, Raymond, and Roy. The couple had a fifth child, Ruth, in December 1903. In 1906, when Disney was 4, the family moved to a farm in Marceline, Missouri, where his uncle Robert had just purchased land. In Marceline, Disney developed his interest in drawing when he was paid to draw the horse of a retired neighborhood doctor. Elias was a subscriber to the Appeal to Reason newspaper, and Disney practiced drawing done by copying the front page cartoons of Ryan Walker. Disney also began to develop an ability to work with watercolors and crayons. He lived near the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe railway line and became enamored with trains. And he and his younger sister Ruth started school at the same time at the Park School in Marceline in the late 1909. In 1911, the Disneys moved to Kansas City, Missouri, where there Disney attended the Benton Grammar School, where he met fellow student Walter Pfeiffer, who came from a family of theater fans of introduced Disney to the world of vaudeville and motion pictures. Before long, he was spending more time at the Pfeiffer's house than at home. Elias had purchased a newspaper delivery route for the Kansas City Star and the Kansas City Times. Disney and his brother Roy woke up at 4:30 every morning to deliver the Times before school and repeated the round for the Evening Star after school. The schedule was exhausting, and Disney often received poor grades after falling asleep in class, but he continued his paper route for more than 6 years. He attended Saturday courses at the Kansas City Art Institute and also took a constant correspondence course in cartooning. In 1917, Elias bought stock on the Chicago jelly producer, the Ozell Company, and moved back to the city with his family. Disney enrolled at McKinley High School and became the cartoonist of the school newspaper. Drawing patriotic pictures about how World War I, he also took night courses at the Chicago Academy of Fine Arts. In mid-1918, Disney attempted to join the United States Army to fight against the Germans, but he was rejected for being too young after forging the Bath of Birth. On his birth certificate, he joined the Red Cross in September 1918 as an ambulance driver. He was shipped to France but arrived in November. After the armistice, he drew cartoons on the side of his ambulance and decorating and had some of his work published in the Army newspaper, Stars and Stripes. Disney returned to Kansas City in October 1919, where he worked as an apprentice artist at the Pressman Rubin Commercial Art Studio. There he drew commercial illustrations for advertising theater programs and catalogs. He also befriended fellow artist Ubi Iwerks. Early career, 1920-1928. In January 1920, as Pressman Rubin's revenue declined after Christmas, Disney and Iwerks were played off. They started with their own business, the short-lived Iwerks Disney commercial artists, failing to attract many customers. Disney and Iwerks agreed that Disney should leave temporarily to earn money at the Kansas City Film Ad Company, run by A.V. Colger. The following month, the Iwerks, who was not able to run their business alone, also joined. The company produced commercials using the cutout animation technique. Disney became interested in animation, although he preferred drawing characters such as Mutt and Jeff and Coco the Clown, with the assistance of a borrowed book and an animation and a camera. He began experimenting at home. He came to a conclusion that cell animation was more promising than the cutout method. Unable to persuade Cougar to try cell animation at the company, Disney opened a new business with a co-worker from the film ad company, Fred Harmon. Their main client was the local Newman Theater, and the short cartoons they produced were sold as Newman's Lavograms. Disney studied Paul Terry's Aesop's Fables as a model, and the first 6 Lavograms were modernized fairy tales. In May 1921, the success of the Lavograms led to the establishment of Lavogram Studio, for which he hired more animators including Fred Harmon's brother Hugh, Rudolph Isling, and iWorks. The Lavograms cartoon did not provide enough income to keep the company solvent, so Disney started production of Alice's Wonderland, based on the Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, which combined live action with animation. He cast Virginia Davis in the title role. The result, a 12.5-minute one-reel film, was completed too late to save Lavograms Studio, which went into bankruptcy in 1923. Disney moved to Hollywood in July 1923. Although New York was the center of the cartoon industry, he was attracted to Los Angeles because his brother Roy was convalescing from tuberculosis there, and he hoped to become a live-action film director. Disney's efforts to sell Alice's in Wonderland were in vain until he heard from New York film distributor Margaret J. Winkler. She was losing the rights to both the Out of the Inkwell and Felix the Cat cartoons, and needed a new series. In October, they signed a contract for six Alice comedies, with an option for 2 further series of 6 episodes each. Disney and his brother Roy formed the Disney's Brothers Studio, which later became the Walt Disney Company, to produce the films. They persuaded Davis and her family to relocate to Hollywood to continue production. With Davis on contract with $100 a month in July 1924, Disney was hired iWorks, persuading him to relocate to Hollywood from Kansas City. Early in 1925, Disney hired an ink artist, Lillian Bounds. They married in July of that year at her brother's house in her hometown in Lewiston, Idaho. The marriage was generally happy, according to Lillian, although according to Disney's biographer Neil Gabler, she did not accept Walt's decisions meekly, or his status unquestionably. She admitted that he was always telling people how henpecked he is. Lillian had a little interest in films or the Hollywood social scene, and she was, in the words of the historian Stephen Watts, content with household management and providing support for her husband. Their marriage produced 2 daughters, Diane, born in December 1933, and Sharon, adopted in December 1936, born 6 weeks previously. Within the family, neither Disney nor his wife hid the fact Sharon had been adopted, although they became annoyed if people outside the family raised the point. The Disneys were careful to keep their daughters out of the public eye as much as possible, particularly in the light of the Lindbergh kidnapping. Disney took steps to ensure his daughters were not photographed by the press. By 1926, Winkler's role in the distribution of the Alice series had been handed over to her husband, the film producer Charles Mintz, although the relationship between him and Disney was sometimes strained. The series ran until July 1927, by which time Disney had begun to tire of it, and wanted to move away from the mixed format of all animations. After Mintz requested new material to distribute through Universal Pictures, Disney and Iwerks created Oswald the Lucky Rabbit, a character Disney wanted to be peppy, alert, saucy, and venturesome, keeping him also neat and trim. In February 1928, Disney hoped to negotiate a larger fee for producing the Oswald series, but found Mintz wanting to reduce the payments. Mintz had also persuaded him many of the artists involved to work directly for him, including Harmon Ising, Carmen Maxwell, and Fritz Freleng. Disney also found out that Universal owned the intellectual property rights to Oswald. Mintz threatened to start his own studio and produce the series himself if Disney refused to accept the reductions. Disney declined Mintz's ultimatum and lost most of his animation staff, except Iwerks, who chose to remain with him. Creation of Mickey Mouse to the first Academy Awards 1928-1933. To replace Oswald, Disney and Iwerks developed Mickey Mouse, possibly inspired by a pet mouse that Disney had adopted while working in his Laugh-O-Gram studio. Although the origins of the character are unclear, Disney's original choice of name was Mortimer Mouse, but Lillian thought it too pompous and suggested Mickey instead. Iwerks revised Disney's provisional sketches to make the character easier to animate. Disney, who had begun to distance himself from the animation process, provided Mickey's voice until 1947. In the words of one Disney employee, Ubi designed Mickey's physical appearance, but Walt gave him his soul. Mickey Mouse first appeared in May 1928 as a single test screening of the short Plain Crazy, but it, and the second feature, The Galloping Gaucho, failed to find the distributor. Following the 1927 sensation, The Jazz Singer, Disney used synchronized sound on the third short, Steamboat Willie, to create the first post-produced sound cartoon after the animation was complete. Disney signed a contract with the former executive of Universal Pictures, Pat Powers, to use the Powers Cinephone recording system. Cinephone became the new distributor for Disney's early sound cartoons, which soon became popular. To improve the quality of the music, Disney hired the professional composer and arranger Carl Stalling, on whose suggestion the Silly Symphony series was developed, providing stories through the use of music. The first in the series, The Skeleton Dance 1929, was drawn and animated entirely by Iwerks. Also hired at this time were several local artists. Some of whom stayed with the company as core animators. The group later became known as the Nine Old Men. Both the Mickey Mouse and Silly Symphony series were successful, but Disney and his brother felt they were not receiving their rightful share of profits from Powers. In 1930, Disney tried to trim costs from the process by urging Iwerks to abandon the practice of animating every separate cell in favor of the more efficient technique of drawing key poses and letting lower-paid assistants sketch in between poses. Disney asked Powers for an increase in payments for the cartoons. Powers refused and signed Iwerks to work for him. Stalling resigned shortly afterwards, thinking that without Iwerks, the Disney studio would close. Disney had a nervous breakdown in October 1931, which he blamed on the machinations of Powers and his own overwork. So he and Lillian took an extended holiday to Cuba and a cruise to Panama to recover. With the loss of Powers as distributor, Disney Studios signed a contract with Columbia Pictures to distribute the Mickey Mouse cartoons, which became increasingly popular, including internationally. Disney always always keen to embrace new technology, filmed Flowers and Trees 1932 in full-color 3-strip Technicolor. He was also able to negotiate a deal giving him the sole right to use the 3-strip process until August 31st, 1935. All subsequent Silly Symphonies cartoons were in color. Flowers and Trees was popular with audiences and won the Academy Award for Best Short Subject Cartoon at the 1932 ceremony. Disney had been nominated for another film in that category, Mickey's Orphans, and received an honorary award for the creation of Mickey Mouse. In 1933, Disney produced The Three Little Pigs, a film described by the media historian Adrian Danks as the most successful short animation of all time. The film won Disney another Academy Award in the short subject cartoon category. This film's success led to a further increase in the studio staff, which numbered nearly 200 by the end of the year. Disney realized the importance of telling emotionally gripping stories that would interest the audience, and he invested in the story department, separate from the animators, with storyboard artists who would detail the plots of Disney films. Golden Age of Animation, 1934-1941. In 1934, Disney had become dissatisfied with producing formulaic cartoon shorts and believed a feature-length cartoon would be more profitable. The studio began the four-year production of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs based on a fairy tale. When news leaked out about the project, many in the film industry predicted it would bankrupt the company. Industry insiders nicknamed it Disney's Folly. The film, which was the first animated feature made in full color and sound, cost $1.5 million to produce, 3 times over budget. To ensure the animation was as realistic as possible, Disney sent his animators on course at the Chouinard Arts Institute. He brought animals into the studio and hired actors so that the animators could study realistic movements. To portray the changing perspective of the background as the camera moved through the scene, Disney's animators developed a multiplane camera which allowed drawings on pieces of glass to be set at various distances from the camera, creating an illusion of depth. The glass could be moved to create the impression of a camera passing through the scene. The first work created on the camera, a silly symphony called The Old Mill, 1937, won the Academy Award for an animated short film because of its impressive visual power. Although Snow White had been largely finished by the time the multiplane camera had been completed, Disney ordered some scenes to be redrawn to use the new effects. Snow White premiered in December 1937 to high praise from critics and audiences. The film became the most successful motion picture of 1938, and by May 1939, its total gross of $6.5 million made it the most successful sound film made to that date. Disney won another honorary Academy Award, which consisted of 1 full-size and 7 miniature Oscar statuettes. The success of Snow White heralded one of the most productive eras for the studio. The Walt Disney Family Museum calls the following years the Golden Age of Animation. With the work on Snow White finished, the studio began producing Pinocchio in early 1938 and Fantasia in November of the same year. Both films were released in 1940, and neither performed well at the box office, partly because revenues from Europe had dropped following the start of World War II in 1939. The studio made a loss on both pictures and was deeply in debt by the end of February 1941. In response to the financial crisis, Disney and his brother Roy started the company's first public stock offering in 1940 and implemented heavy salary cuts. The latter measure, and Disney's sometimes high-handed and sensitive matter of dealing with staff, led to a 1941 animator strike, which lasted 5 weeks. while the federal mediator from the National Labor Relations Board negotiated with the two sides. Disney accepted an offer from the Office of the Coordinator of Inter-American Affairs to make a goodwill trip to South America, ensuring he was absent during a resolution he knew would be unfavorable to the studio. As a result of the strike and the financial state of the company, several animators left the studio, and Disney's relationship with other members of staff was permanently strained as a result. The strike temporarily interrupted by the studio's next production, Dumbo, 1941, which Disney produced in a simple and inexpensive manner. The film received a positive reaction from audiences and critics alike. World War II and beyond, 1941-1950. Shortly after the release of Dumbo on October 1941, the U.S. entered World War II. Disney formed the Walt Disney Training Films unit within the company to produce instruction films for the military such as 4 methods of flesh reviving and aircraft production methods. Disney also met with Henry Morgenthau Jr. and the Secretary of the Treasury and agreed to produce short Donald Duck cartoons to promote war bonds. Disney also produced several propaganda productions, including shorts such as Der Führer's Face, which won an Academy Award, and the 1943 feature film Victory Through Air Power. The military films generated only enough revenue to cover costs, and the feature film Bambi, which had been in production since 1937, underperformed on its release in April 1942 and lost $200,000 at the box office. On top of the low earnings from Pinocchio and Fantasia, the company had debts of $4 million with the Bank of America in 1944. At a meeting with Bank of America executives to discuss the future of the company, the bank's chairman and founder, Amedeo Giannini, told his executives, "I've been watching the Disney's pictures quite closely because I knew we were lending them money far and above the financial risk. They're good this year, they're good at next year, and they're good at the year after. You have to relax and give him time to market their product." Disney's production of short films decreased in the late 1940s, coinciding with increasing competition in the animation market from Warner Brothers and Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer. Roy Disney, for financial reasons, suggested more combined animation and live-action productions. In 1948, Disney initiated the series of popular live-action nature films titled True Life Adventures with Seal Island. The first, the film won the Academy Award in the Best Short Subject to Real category. Disney grew more politically conservative as he got older, a Democratic Party supporter until the 1940 presidential election, when he switched allegiance to the Republican Party. He became a generous donor to Thomas E. Dewey's 1944 bid for the presidency. In 1946, he was a founding member of the Motion Picture Alliance for the Preservation of American Ideals, an organization who stated they believed in and like the American way of life. We find ourselves in sharp revolt against the rising tide of communism, fascism, and kindred beliefs that seek by subversive means to undermine and change his way of life. In 1947, during the Second Red Scare, Disney testified before the House Un-American Activities Committee, HUAC, where he branded Herbert Sorrell, David Hilberman, and William Pomerantz, former animators and labor union, the organizers, as communist agitators. Disney stated that the 1941 strike led by them was part of an organized communist effort to gain influence in Hollywood. It was alleged by the New York Times in 1993 that Disney had been passing secret information to the FBI from 1940 until his death in 1966. In return for this information, J. Edgar Hoover allowed Disney to film in the FBI headquarters in Washington. Disney was made a full special agent in charge contact in 1954. In 1949, Disney and his family moved to a new home in the Holmby Hills district of Los Angeles. With the help of his friends, Walt and Betty Kimball, who already had their own backyard railroad, Disney developed new blueprints and immediately set to work on creating a miniature live steam railroad for his backyard. The name of the railroad, Carlwood Pacific Railroad, came from his home location on Carlwood Drive. The miniature working steam locomotive was built by Disney Studios Imagineer Roger E. Broggie, and Disney named it Lily Bell after his wife. After 3 years, Disney ordered it into storage due to a series of accidents involving his guests. Theme parks, television, and other interests. 1950, 1966. In early 1950, Disney produced Cinderella, his studio's first animated feature in 8 years. It was popular with critics and theater audiences, costing $2.2 million to produce. It earned nearly $8 million in its first year. Disney was less involved than he had been with previous pictures because of his involvement in his first entirely live-action feature, Treasure Island 1950, which was shot in Britain, as was The Story of Robin Hood and There's Merry Men 1952. Other all-live-action features followed, many of which had patriotic themes. He continued to produce full-length animated features too, including Alice in Wonderland 1951 and Peter Pan 1953. From the early to mid-1950s, Disney began to devote less attention to the animation department, entrusting most of its operations to his key animators, the Nine Old Men, although he was always present at the story meetings. Instead, he started concentrating on other ventures. For several years, Disney had been considering building a theme park. When he visited Griffith Park in Los Angeles with his daughters, he wanted to be in a clean, unspoiled park where both children and their parents could have fun. He visited the Tivoli Gardens in Copenhagen, Denmark. He was heavily influenced by the cleanliness and layout of the park. In March 1952, he received a zoning permission to build a theme park in Burbank, near the Disney Studios. This site proved too small, and a larger plot in Anaheim, 35 miles or 56 kilometers south of the studio, was purchased to distance the project from the studio which might attract the criticism and shareholders. Disney formed WED Enterprises, now Walt Disney Imagineering, and used his own money to fund a group of designers and animators to work on the plans. Those involved became well known as Imagineers. After obtaining bank funding, he invited other stockholders, American Broadcasting, Paramount Theaters, part of American Broadcasting Company, ABC, and Western Printing of Lithographing Company. In mid-1954, Disney sent his Imagineers to every amusement park in the U.S. to analyze what worked and what pitfalls or problems there were in the various locations, and incorporated their findings into his design. Construction work started in July 1954, and Disneyland opened in July 1955. The opening ceremony was broadcast on ABC, which reached 70 million viewers. The park was designed as a series of theme lands and linked to by the Central Main Street USA, a replica of the main street in his hometown of Marceline. The connected themed areas were Adventureland, Frontierland, Fantasyland, and Tomorrowland. The park also contained a narrow gauge, Disneyland Railroad, that linked the lands. Around the outside of the park was a high berm to separate the park from the outside world. An editorial in the New York Times considered that Disney had tastefully combined some of the pleasant things of yesterday with fantasy and dreams of tomorrow. Although they were early minor problems with the park, it was a success, and after a month's operation, Disney was receiving over 220,000 visitors a day. By the end of its first year, it attracted 3.6 million guests. The money from ABC was contingent on Disney television programs. The studio had been involved in a successful television special on Christmas Day 1950 about the making of Alice in Wonderland. Roy believed the program added millions to the box office takings. In a March 1951 letter to shareholders, he wrote that television can be a most powerful selling aid for us, as well as a source of a revenue. It will probably be on this premise that we enter television when we do. In 1954, after the Disneyland funding had been agreed, ABC broadcast Walt Disney's Disneyland, an anthology consisting of animated cartoons, live-action features, and other material from the Disney Studios library. The show was successful in terms of ratings and profits, earning the audience a share of over 50%. In April 1955, Newsweek called the series an American institution. ABC was pleased with the ratings, leading to Disney's first daily television program, The Mickey Mouse Club, a variety show catering specifically to children. The program was accompanied by merchandising through various companies. Western Printing, for example, had been producing coloring books and comics for over 20 years and produced several items connected to the show. One of the segments of Disneyland consisted of the 5-part miniseries Davy Crockett, which, according to Gabler, became an overnight sensation. The show's theme song, The Ballad of Davy Crockett, became internationally popular, and 10 million records were sold. As a result, Disney formed his own record production and distribution entity, Disneyland Records, as well as the construction of Disneyland. Disney worked on other projects away from the studio. He was consultant to the 1959 American National Exhibition in Moscow. Disney Studios' contribution was the America the Beautiful, a 19-minute film in the 360-degree Sirikarama Theater that was one of the most popular attractions. The following year, he acted as the chairman of the pageantry committee for the 1960 Winter Olympics in Squaw Valley, California, where he designed the opening, closing, and medal ceremonies. Despite the demands wrought by non-studio projects, Disney continued to work on film and television projects in 1955. He was involved in Men in Space, an episode of the Disneyland series which was made in collaboration with NASA. Rocket designer Werner von Braun. Disney also oversaw respect of the full-length features Lady and Tramp, the first animated film in CinemaScope. In 1955, Sleeping Beauty, the first animated film in Technorama 70mm film in 1959, 101 Dalmatians, first animated film to use exerocells in 1961, and The Sword and Stone in 1963. In 1964, Disney produced Mary Poppins, based on the book of series by P.L. Travers. He had been trying to acquire the rights to the story since the 1940s. It became the most successful Disney film of the 60s. Although Travers disliked the film intensely and regretted having sold the rights, The same year, he also became involved in plans to expand the California Institute of the Arts, colloquially called CalArts, and had an architect draw up blueprints for a new building. Dizzy provided 4 exhibitions for the 1964 New York World's Fair, for which he obtained funding from a selected corporate sponsors for PepsiCo, who planned a tribute to UNICEF. Dizzy developed It's a Small World, a boat ride with audio and animatronic dolls depicting children of the world, Great Moments with Mr. Lincoln, contained an animatronic of Abraham Lincoln giving excerpts from his speeches, Carousel Progress, promoted the importance of electricity, and Ford's Magic Skyway portrayed the progress of mankind. Elements of all 4 exhibits, principally concepts and technology, were reinstalled in Disneyland, although It's a Small World is a ride that most closely resembles the original. During the early to mid-1960s, Disney developed plans for a ski resort in Mineral King, a glacial valley in California, Sierra Nevada. He hired experts such as the renowned Olympic ski coach and ski area designer Willie Schaefer, which became from Disneyland accounting for an increasing proportion of the studio's income. Disney continued to look for venues for other attractions. In late 1965, he announced plans to develop another theme park to be called Disney World, now Walt Disney World, a few miles southwest of Orlando, Florida. Disney World was to include the Magic Kingdom, a larger and more elaborate version of Disneyland, plus golf courses and resort hotels. The heart of Disney World was to be the experimental prototype community of tomorrow. Epcot, which he has described as an experimental prototype community of tomorrow that will take its cue from the new ideas and new technologies that are now emerging from the creative centers of American industry. It will be a community of tomorrow that will never be completed, but will always be introducing and testing and demonstrating new materials and systems. And Epcot will always be a showcase to the world of the ingenuity and imagination of American free enterprise. During 1966, Disney cultivated businesses willing to sponsor Epcot. He increased his involvement in the studio's films. He was heavily involved in the story development of The Jungle Book, the live-action musical feature The Happiest Millionaire, both 1967, and the animated short Winnie the Pooh and the Blustery Day in 1968. Illness, death, and aftermath. Disney had been a heavy smoker since World War I. He did not use cigarettes with filters. He had smoked a pipe as a young man. In early November 1966, he was diagnosed with lung cancer and was treated with cobalt therapy. On November 30th, he felt unwell and was taken by ambulance from his home to St. Joseph Hospital, where, in December 15, 1966, 10 days after his 65th birthday, he died of circulatory collapse caused by the cancer. His remains were cremated 2 days later, and his ashes were interred at the Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Glendale, California. The release of The Jungle Book and The Happiest Millionaire in 1967 raised the total number of feature films that Disney had been involved in to 81. When Winnie the Pooh and the Blustery Day was released in 1968, it earned Disney an Academy Award in the Short Subject Cartoon category, awarded posthumously. After Disney's death, his studios continued to produce live-action films prolifically, but largely abandoned animation until the late 1980s, after which there was what the New York Times described as a Disney Renaissance that began The Little Mermaid in 1989, Disney's companies continued to produce successful film, television, and stage entertainment. Disney plans for a futuristic city of Epcot did not come to fruition. After Disney's death, his brother Walt interfered his retirement to take full control of the Disney companies. He changed the focus of the project from a town to an attraction. At the inauguration in 1971, Roy dedicated Walt Disney World to his brother. Walt Disney World expanded with the opening of Epcot Center in 1982. Walt Disney's vision of the functional city was replaced by a park more akin to the permanent World's Fair. In 2009, the Walt Disney Family Museum, designed by Disney's daughter Diane and her son Walter E.D. Miller, opened in the Presidio of San Francisco. Thousands of artifacts from Disney's life and career are on display, including numerous awards that he received. In 2014, the Disney theme parks around the world hosted approximately 134 million visitors. Disney has been portrayed numerous times in fictional works. H.G. Wells references Disney in his 1938 novel The Holy Terror, in which world detector Rudd fears that Donald Duck is meant to lampoon the detector. Disney was portrayed by Len Carroll in the 1995 made-for-TV film A Dream is a Wish Your Heart Makes, an Enid Funicello story, and by Tom Hanks in the 2013 film Saving Mr. Banks. In 2001, the German author Peter Stephen Junks published Der König von America, The King of America, the fictional work of Disney's later years that reimagines him as a power-hungry racist. The composer Philip Glass later adapted the book into the opera The Perfect American in 2013. So that's the history of the Walt Disney himself.